Chapter 30. Change will come. Plenty of people have claimed they had an epiphany that radically altered their lives. I wasn't fortunate enough to encounter a dazzling light, visions, or a voice of infinite wisdom to shake my world into its foundation. Being brick-headed, it would have taken the sky falling on me to notice the need for a change in my life. I failed continually to see the bigger picture. I trudged through life with no purpose or direction. All I saw were steel bars, thick walls, armed guards, and madness. Fighting the good fight was my motto, so in lieu of sitting around in D section on grade B, I decided to challenge a violation report against me with the 602 appeal. Months later, I won the appeal, and my grade A status was restored. It was bittersweet leaving Tretch in D section, thinking he'd arrive later. I had no idea years would pass before I'd see him again. I relished our Crip reminiscences, dialectics, and other philosophical exchanges. Back in C section, I was able to regain enough strength to bench a 500-pound bar that had Chief's name sculpted on it in bold letters, though he couldn't bench the weight. The day I benched the weight with ease for reps, Crip Slim threw his beanie up in the air and started jumping up and down as if he had won the lottery. Slim told me that he was proud and happy that a Crip and nobody else was able to lift the weight. There was also dust gathering on a set of 130-pound dumbbells I started using for standing or sitting shoulder presses, curls, and back arms for 10 to 15 reps. My true feat of strength was being able to perform seated behind the neck shoulder presses for reps with a 375-pound bar. Some guards were still trying for permission for me to compete in the San Quentin weightlifting contest, but the higher echelon vetoed it. While we were driving iron, watchful eyes were always scanning the area. In the background was an unamusing looking Crip, Mad Dog, one of the most loyal and most deadly. He was a wily army veteran who looked like a tall and burly black mountain man. Like sentries, he and the stocky faithful Crip ghetto stood around ready for intruders, prepared to smash anyone foolish enough to violate our territory. At San Quentin, the population of death row for minorities was disproportionately increasing, most for black and Mexicans from South Central Los Angeles, including Bloods from different sets, gang factions. But the interactions between Crips and Bloods on death row, what prisoners call the row, were in sharp contrast to the violent exchanges back in society. Though we drove iron side by side, I can't say we trusted one another. Nevertheless, we did share a commonality in backgrounds, and we were pitted against the same alien penal setting of death. With rare exceptions, there was no squabbling between Crips and Bloods. We were never at war. We did our thing and they did theirs. During the renovation, C-section's death row population was moved to D-section, which was evacuated for our arrival. There was no difference between the units. I was locked up and forced to battle my inner demons. Most of the time I spent concentrating on drawing, which shielded me mentally from the chaos of prison life. When I was drawing, time was irrelevant, not much else mattered. I had no idea drawing was a defensive mechanism for me to combat the negative elements of an idle mind and hands. My life was adopting an alien concept, productivity. On the condemned yard was a huge weight pile and a small, universal type bench press machine attached to the back wall. Right next to us was the Max A yard, consisting of Crips, Bloods, and Black Guerrilla Family, the Aryan Brotherhood, and other gang factions. The Max A was purportedly of unstable lunacy and could erupt at any time. The Max A yard was a potpourri of unstable lunacy and could erupt at any time. Back then, a politicized version of the Crips, the Consolidated Crips organization, gained considerable notoriety. Perhaps in the beginning, its intentions were honorable, but later, allegations of coercive recruiting, cronyism, intimidation, manipulation by Black Guerrilla Family, and improprieties against other Crips cast a long negative shadow on the Consolidated Crips organization. Evil pointed out that if I was at the top of the Consolidated Crips organization, other forces could not have subverted as they did. If it had transformed itself into a political prison entity and cast out the gangster mentality, it would have been the most powerful black group in the prison system. But the Consolidated Crips organization rapid deterioration was hastened by internal conflicts and external antagonists from numerous Crip factions. Crip scrimmages were played out on the Max A yard and throughout the California prisons with deadly force. Many of its organization's leadership jumped to the formidable opposing side. In San Quentin, it was pathetic to hear or catch sight of Crips engaged in a blow-for-blow campaign for dominance. In the final analysis, there were no winners, only disunity. Aggressive interactions between prisoners, or between a guard and a prisoner, were all isolated in these close quarters. While working out on the bench press machine, I caught sight of Freaky Pete, another death row prisoner, a few feet away, backing up quickly from the fence. I knew something was amiss. On the Max A yard, I saw a black prisoner and a southern Mexican guy engaged in battle, with the black man having the upper hand. The tower gunman fired a couple of live rounds, and the black man crumbled to the ground, killed instantly. The Mexican guy died later at the hospital. The violent scenario was as graphic as striking a wooden match and watching it explode into a flame. It was a moment of cold-blooded brutality that captured the attention of every prisoner present. After the guards ordered everyone on the Max A yard to hit the dirt, blacks and Mexicans made half-hearted attempts to wage war, but more shots ended such notions. On the condemned yard, we too were ordered to get down on the ground. A nervous black guard who seemed to have lots on his mind screamed, "Tookie, you better hit the ground right now if you want to live." I stood looking up at the guard as if daring him to shoot before Ghetto and Mad Dog pulled me to the ground. Later, I wondered how it was possible for such an attack to occur in the midst of other black men. It was irrelevant whether the black prisoner was a Crip, Blood, or a member of the black guerrilla family. Where were his friends and comrades? I remember asking Ghetto, "Cuz, what was wrong with that picture?" He replied, "No usalama," which means security in Swahili, whatsoever. That man had homeboys, they all froze. "'Cause you never have to worry about that. I'll be there for you." I voiced the same sentiment to him. Having witnessed 2 men get smoked, I knew my life wasn't worth a wooden nickel in there. Around this time, it came as no surprise that the state-level court denied my appeal, ruling against me. Once the prison staff found out, they took the unprecedented step of sending me to the hole. Other than for harassment, it's difficult to understand the staff's reasoning. Since then, no one else has undergone such treatment. After numerous requests to phone the state-appointed attorney, I was able to make contact and convince him to call the warden to rectify the situation. So I was returned to D-section, where the entire death row unit was preparing to move back to C-section. Then in June 1987, I was uprooted and placed in the hole under suspicion of another escape plot. This time the so-called conspiracy had me teamed up with a cast of unknown Crips. The next day, I was provided with a document that revealed a phone conversation between a person identifying himself as a Crip talking to a San Quentin operator. Not able to speak to me directly, he told the operator, "The Los Angeles Crips have got a job to get Tookie out of here." The person left his full name, address, and 3 phone numbers. Every line and syllable uttered about me was likely considered gospel by the staff. They were eager to believe the worst about me. At the unit classification hearing, it was clear that I remained in the hole pending an investigation. Assigned to the same yard as my homeboy Evil, I met Al, Double Life, T, Little Al, G, and about 20 other Crips. I just missed Tretched. He had been called down to the Los Angeles County Jail by Crip Cato's attorney. Each designated yard was then split in half with different yard schedules. As a result, Evil and I ended up on separate yards, with our homeboys split up. The same was done to the southern and white yard, and the black guerrilla family in the northern yard. This allowed me to become better acquainted with the homeboys. Double Life, G, and I engaged in a quasi-study group to expand our political dialectics and vocabulary. To better understand politics and other topics, it was necessary to learn thousands of new words. Following our workouts on the yard, Double Life didn't hesitate to pull out a long list of words to test me. There was never a moment that I missed the orthography or definition of a word. Studying had opened a new world for me. One day, out of curiosity, I asked my homeboy what the initial G stood for, and he said, God. Other than being born in God's image, he didn't have a leg to stand on. I'm sure it annoyed G when I asked why he wasn't able to liberate himself or me since he was God. But who was I to challenge another man's belief, regardless of its oddity? After a few weeks, all the separated yards were restored. In several lengthy discussions with Evil, we concluded that Crippin wasn't what it used to be. There was nothing worse than Crips giving Crip a bad name. It was a stunning realization to witness Raymond's and my brainchild becoming a caricature of what it once was. In the hole, there were no weights on the yard, so I improvised with push-ups, chin-ups, and basketball. Since I didn't want to lose my yokes, I avoided the burpee exercises, which would have trimmed me down like a greyhound. Prison burpees are the hardest exercise known to man, and I disliked them so much I refused to do any until years later. For many of us, basketball is a frustration release. For many of us, basketball is a frustration releaser, but it is a pity to see so much raw talent deflected from greater possibilities. In the prison grapevine, news traveled fast, especially when someone turns informer. We received that crime dog McGruff from the Rolling 60s was a snitch and headed down to death row. According to Brutality, his crime partner, McGruff snitched on him, and it was his intent to snuff him. The day McGruff was placed on the crip yard, Brutality had a decision to make. At his disposal were enough knives for a small ninja army. Nervously, he blurted out an obscure excuse. "Cuz, I'm going to bust on him, but I need some steel to do the job right." Perhaps he was still rattled after witnessing his CCO homeboy getting a hit on the basketball court days before. But the Leezy had ample time to handle McGruff himself, which he vowed on his life. If Buffaleezy violated his crip word, it would render his voice forever unworthy. Later that week, the counselor announced that the investigation of my so-called escape plot revealed that it was a teenage prank. But it was like playing musical chairs. I wasn't there more than a month when C-section was moved to East Block. Outside the unit, there were 6 fenced yards with weight piles to accommodate death row prisoners. Gone were the days when friends or warring foes either exercised on the same grade A yard or stayed locked up in their cells. The atmosphere in East Block was laid back. I found myself reading less, although occasionally I worked on expanding my vocabulary. The central focus in my life was to develop bigger muscles than I had when I was in society. But because I was shuffled back and forth to the hole, my goal eluded me. With Bub out of commission, Ghetto's newly arrived cousin, Hurt, became my workout partner. Standing over 6 feet, he was a yoked up Cocoa Brown Lothario thug with a cooler than cool stroll. The county jail had sapped his size and strength, but persistent workouts got him back on track. Each day, we eagerly looked forward to the gates being racked open to do battle with the weight pile. Around this same time, a buzz circulated that McGruff had received grade A and was on his way to East Block. His crimey, Buffaleezy, had been talking long smack about what he planned to do. Now it was time to put up or shut up. Once again, Buffaleezy had a decision to make, but he did nothing. Buffaleezy's failure to follow through enraged another Crip sufficiently to fulfill the task. Quickly, McGruff was stretched out on the cement, suffering multiple knife wounds. Buffaleezy ran off to the other side of the yard. The following day, I received a copy of the Confidential Information Disclosure, CIDF, a bureaucratic euphemism for an unnamed person snitching, typically lying on someone. I was accused of being the leader of the Blue Note Crips, actively recruiting others and having inmates assaulted. In the next preposterous CIDF, I received a Crip power struggle was allegedly brewing between Buffaleezy and me. The administration's attempt to characterize Buffaleezy as a control pawn against me was a fiasco from the start. Any aspiration on his or their part was stagnated by Buffaleezy's delusions of grandeur, his inability to honor his word, and fear that rendered him incompetent and foolish. Though not all of Buffaleezy's violations have been mentioned here, I believe his misdeeds continue to eat away at his soul.